At 23:17 on the night of February 14, 1943, Sergeant Arthur Walsh, 22 years old, 0 combat missions completed, crouched in the rear turret of Lancaster ED 763 at 18,000 feet over the Ruhr Valley, watching a Messerschmitt Bf 110 close from 700 yards through a device his flight commander had called useless 3 days earlier. The German night fighter carried 4 20mm cannons and 2 machine guns, closing speed 270 miles per hour. Time to effective firing range, 48 seconds. Air Marshal Harris had told the device's inventor it was ridiculous. The chief of RAF Technical Services called it impractical. Every aviation engineer at Farnborough said the vibration would shatter the mirrors within 10 minutes of takeoff. They were all wrong. RAF Bomber Command had lost 143 aircraft in January 1943, 4 engine heavies, Lancasters, Halifaxes, Stirlings. Each carried 7 crewmen, 1,001 men killed or missing in 31 days. The primary killer, German night fighters, Messerschmitt Bf 110s equipped with upward-firing cannons, Junkers Ju-88s with radar intercept systems, Focke-Wulf FW-190S modified for night operations. Standard attack pattern, approach from below and behind, exploit the blind spot beneath the bomber's tail, fire upward into the fuel tanks and bomb bay. Most crews never saw their attacker. The Lancaster bomber carried 10 Browning .303 caliber machine guns, 4 in the rear turret, 2 in the dorsal turret, 4 in the nose turret on some variants. The rear turret rotated 360 degrees. Elevation, 60 degrees up, 60 degrees down. The Fraser-Nash FN-20 turret, 700 pounds of steel and hydraulics. The rear gunner sat in a perspex bubble, temperature at 18,000 feet, minus 30 degrees Celsius. The gunner wore electrically heated suits. When the heating failed, frostbite occurred within 12 minutes. Visibility from the rear turret, excellent to the sides and rear, poor below. The gunner could not see directly underneath the aircraft without leaning forward and looking down past the turret structure. German pilots understood this limitation. Luftwaffe night fighter doctrine, refined through 18 months of combat, specified the attack approach, position 300 feet below and 500 feet behind the bomber, match speed close to 200 feet, fire a 3-second burst into the fuselage between the tail and the wing root. Survival rate for bombers attacked this way. RAF Bomber Command understood the problem. Engineers proposed ventral gun turrets, belly-mounted periscopes, downward-facing mirrors. Every proposal encountered the same obstacles: weight, complexity, maintenance, production time. The Lancaster already weighed 63,000 pounds fully loaded. Adding another turret meant reducing bomb load or fuel capacity. Either choice reduced mission effectiveness. The engineering specifications required any modification to withstand vibration levels measured at 8.6 on the Richter scale equivalent during sustained bomber operations. Temperature range, minus 40 to plus 30 degrees Celsius. Altitude, up to 24,000 feet. Duration, 8 to 10 hours per mission. Standard optical equipment failed these specifications. Military-grade periscopes weighed 40 to 60 pounds. Installation required structural modifications to the airframe. Production time, 6 weeks per aircraft. By February 1943, RAF Bomber Command operated 642 heavy bombers. Modifying the fleet would take 4 years. German night fighter effectiveness increased monthly. January 1943, 143 bombers lost. Projected losses for February, 170 aircraft. March, 200. The mathematics pointed towards unsustainable casualties by summer 1943. Bomber Command needed a solution that required no structural modification, added minimal weight, could be installed in existing aircraft, and worked immediately. No such solution existed in the official proposals. Geoffrey Dearnaley taught physics at Ashbourne Grammar School in Derbyshire. 41 years old, 5 feet 8 inches tall, 148 pounds. He had taught at Ashbourne for 16 years. Mechanics, optics, thermodynamics. His students consistently scored highest in the county examinations. Before becoming a teacher, Dearnaley worked as an optical technician at Barr and Stroud in Glasgow, 3 years, 1921 to 1924. He calibrated naval rangefinders and submarine periscopes. Tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters. He left Barr and Stroud to pursue teaching. Better hours, more stable income, A wife and 2 children required stability. Dearnaley's older brother flew Sopwith camels in the Great War. Shot down over Passchendaele in October 1917, survived with burns to his hands and face. He described the experience in letters. The impossibility of seeing enemy aircraft approaching from below, the sudden impact of bullets, the fire spreading through the fuel tank. 26 years later, Geoffrey Dearnaley read casualty reports from Bomber Command. The statistics reminded him of his brother's letters. Attacks from below. Crews unable to see the threat. Fire. In November 1942, Dearnaley attended a public lecture at Derby Technical College. The speaker, a group captain from RAF Bomber Command, discussing the strategic bombing campaign. During the question period, Dearnaley asks about defensive armament against attacks from below. The group captain's answer: "We're working on it. The engineering challenges are substantial." Dearnaley understood engineering challenges. He also understood optics. He spent 3 evenings in his workshop at home, a converted garden shed. Workbench, vise, hand tools, optical equipment salvaged from teaching demonstrations. He built a prototype using cardboard, 2 mirrors from a lady's compact, and a brass tube from a broken telescope. Total weight, 6 ounces. Cost, nothing. All components were recycled. The device was a periscope. Simple. 2 mirrors positioned at 45-degree angles inside a tube. Light entered the bottom, reflected off the lower mirror, traveled up the tube, reflected off the upper mirror, exited through an eyepiece. The design allowed a person to see around corners, or in this case, underneath an aircraft. Dearnaley tested the prototype in his shed. He positioned it beneath a shelf and looked through the eyepiece. Perfect visibility of the floor area that would otherwise be hidden. He calculated the specifications for an aviation version. The mirrors needed to be 3 inches square. First surface mirrors to prevent double images. The tube needed to be 18 inches long to provide adequate offset. Construction material, aluminum to minimize weight. Total weight, 1 pound 4 ounces. No structural modifications required. The device could be mounted to existing turret framework using simple brackets. Installation time, 20 minutes. Cost per unit, £2 7 shillings. On December 3, 1942, Dearnaley wrote a letter to the Air Ministry, 3 pages. Technical specifications. Diagrams. He included the cardboard prototype. 6 weeks passed without response. On January 18, 1943, Dearnaley received a form letter acknowledging receipt of his submission. The letter thanked him for his interest in contributing to the war effort. It explained that all proposals underwent review by the appropriate technical committees. Processing time, 6 to 8 weeks. Dearnaley calculated casualty rates during 6 to 8 weeks of delays. At current loss rates, 350 to 470 aircraft, 2,450 to 3,219 men. He wrote directly to Air Marshal Arthur Harris, Commander-in-Chief of Bomber Command. 1 page. No technical details. Just a simple statement. I can help your gunners see underneath their aircraft using a device that weighs 1 pound and costs £2 to build. Harris's office responded within 4 days. A staff officer invited Dearnaley to RAF High Wycombe for a demonstration. Dearnaley arrived at RAF High Wycombe on February 1, 1943. He carried his cardboard prototype in a leather satchel. The meeting took place in a briefing room. Present, 3 wing commanders, 2 group captains, 1 air commodore, and a civilian engineer from the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough. Dearnaley explained the device. He demonstrated the prototype. He presented his calculations showing weight, cost, and installation time. Air Commodore Peters spoke first. "Mr. Dearnaley, we appreciate your initiative. However, this device presents several insurmountable problems." He listed them. First, vibration. The Lancaster's 4 Merlin engines produced vibration levels that destroyed precision optical equipment within hours. Military periscopes required shock mounting systems that weighed 40 pounds. Dearnaley's device had no shock mounting. Second, temperature. At 18,000 feet, temperatures reached -40 degrees Celsius. Moisture in the air would condense on the mirrors, freeze, and render them useless. Third, combat conditions. Gunners operated in darkness, often in evasive maneuvers that subjected them to 2 or 3 G-forces. They wore bulky flight suits and oxygen masks. The suggestion that they could effectively use a small eyepiece while tracking a fast-moving target was impractical. Fourth, field of view. The proposed mirrors were 3 inches square. This provided a tiny viewing angle compared to direct vision. Gunners needed maximum situational awareness. Restricting their vision through a narrow periscope was tactically unsound. Wing Commander Ashton added, "We've tested periscopic systems before. They all failed for the same reasons. The mirrors crack. The alignment shifts. Gunners refuse to use them because they can't acquire targets quickly enough." The civilian engineer from Farnborough contributed technical analysis. The optical requirements for military aviation equipment are specified in Air Ministry Order 1742. Your device doesn't meet them. It lacks anti-reflection coating, shock mounting, thermal compensation, and sealed optics. It would fail qualification testing. Dearnaley listened. Then he asked a question. "How many bombers did you lose last month?" 143. Air Commodore Peters replied. "How many were attacked from below?" "We estimate approximately 80%. 114 aircraft. 798 men. How many of those gunners saw their attacker before being hit?" Silence. Dearnaley continued. "My device won't meet your specifications. It might crack, it might fog, it might be difficult to use. But right now, your gunners see nothing is worse than something imperfect." Group Captain Morrison, who had remained silent throughout the meeting, spoke. "Show me the prototype again." Dearnaley handed him the cardboard device. Morrison examined it for 2 minutes. He looked through the eyepiece. He rotated it. He tested the mirror angles. "This weighs 6 ounces?" "Yes, sir." "How quickly could you build a proper version?" 4 days. "I need access to first surface mirrors and aluminum tubing." Morrison turned to Air Commodore Peters. "Let him build it. We'll test it in 1 aircraft. 1 mission. If it fails, we've lost 4 days and £3. If it works, we might save lives." Peters was not convinced. Air Marshal Harris called this idea ridiculous when he forwarded Dearnaley's letter. "Then let's prove it's ridiculous with evidence rather than assumption." They were all wrong. What Dearnaley understood wasn't complicated optical engineering. It was the difference between perfect and useful. Every military specification demanded perfection, but in combat, useful equipment that worked 70% of the time saved more lives than perfect equipment that never got built. If you want to see how a physics teacher's 6-ounce cardboard prototype defeated German night fighters and saved 280 to 4 bomber crews, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories like this. And please subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Dearnaley. Group Captain Morrison authorized Dearnaley to build a working prototype. He assigned him to the RAF technical workshops at High Wycombe. 4 days. Whatever materials he needed. Dearnaley spent the first day calculating specifications. The rear gunner's position in the Lancaster placed his eyes approximately 5 feet above the aircraft's lower fuselage. To see underneath the aircraft, the periscope needed to extend below the turret housing by at least 18 inches. This created a tube total length of 43 inches from lower mirror to eyepiece. The field of view depended on mirror size and tube length. 3-inch square mirrors at 43-inch separation provided a viewing angle of 7.9 degrees, narrow, but sufficient to detect aircraft within a 90-degree arc below the bomber. First surface mirrors were critical. Standard bathroom mirrors had reflective coating on the back surface. Light passed through glass, reflected off the coating, passed through glass again. This created double images and reduced clarity. First surface mirrors had reflective coating on the front surface, clear image. RAF supply officers located 6 first surface mirrors at a photographic laboratory in London. Each mirror, 3 inches by 3 inches by 1/8 inch thick. Optical quality glass, aluminum coating, 92% reflectivity. Dearnaley selected aluminum tubing, 3 1/4 inches square cross-section. Wall thickness, 1/16 inch. Weight, 4 ounces per foot. Total tube length needed 43 inches. Weight, 14.3 ounces. Mirror mounts required precision. Each mirror had to be positioned at exactly 45 degrees. Deviation of more than half a degree would misalign the image. Dearnaley machined the mounts from brass, 4 triangular brackets per mirror. Adjustment screws allowed fine-tuning of the angle. A lower mirror mount extended below the turret. Exposure to slipstream. At 220 miles per hour, the air pressure would be substantial. Dearnaley calculated the force. Approximately 6 pounds per square inch on a 3-inch square mirror. Total force, 54 pounds. The mount needed to be rigid. He reinforced the lower section with steel brackets, added 3 ounces to the total weight. The eyepiece presented a human factors problem. Gunners wore oxygen masks that covered nose and mouth. They wore leather helmets, They needed to position their eye close to the eyepiece while maintaining the ability to look away quickly for direct vision. Dearnaley designed a rubber eye cup. Soft. Flexible. The gunner could press his face against it without discomfort. The eye cup attached to the upper tube with friction fit. If the gunner needed to look away quickly, he simply moved his head. No complex mechanisms. Temperature compensation was the most difficult. At ground level, 15 degrees Celsius. At 18,000 feet, minus 30 degrees Celsius. Temperature change. 45 degrees. Aluminum's coefficient of thermal expansion, 20 times 3.1 millionths per degree Celsius. Over 43 inches and 45 degrees change, the aluminum tube would contract by 0.044 inches, just over 1 millimeter. This was actually helpful. As temperature decreased, everything contracted. Mirrors, tube, mounts. They contracted together. No relative movement, no misalignment. But moisture was the enemy. Breath from the gunner contained water vapor. At minus 30 degrees, that vapor froze instantly on any surface it touched. The upper mirror would fog with ice within minutes. Dearnaley needed to prevent gunner's breath from reaching the mirrors. He designed a baffle system, a metal plate positioned 3 inches below the eyepiece, angled to deflect breath away from the optical path. Not perfect, but it would delay fogging. He also included a simple heating element, nichrome wire wrapped around the upper mirror mount, connected to the aircraft's electrical system. Current, 0.5 amperes at 24 volts. Power, 12 watts, just enough to keep the mirror above freezing point. Total weight of complete device, 1 pound 11 ounces. On February 4th, Dearnaley completed the first production prototype. Polished aluminum, precise mirror alignment, rubber eye cup, heating element. He tested it in the workshop, positioned it underneath a workbench, looked through the eyepiece. Perfect clarity. Field of view, narrow but adequate. Group Captain Morrison inspected the device. How do we mount it in an aircraft? 4 brackets attached to the turret framework, 8 bolts. Installation time 25 minutes. Vibration testing? I suggest we skip laboratory testing and proceed directly to flight testing. Laboratory vibration tables don't replicate the complex harmonics of actual flight. If it fails in the aircraft, we'll know immediately. Morrison smiled. You want to bypass 6 months of qualification testing? I want to save lives next week, not next year. On February 6, a ground crew installed Dearnaley's device in Lancaster ED 763. Sergeant Arthur Walsh, the aircraft's regular rear gunner, participated in the installation. He watched the process, asked questions. Will this actually work, sir? Dearnaley replied, I believe so. But you'll know better than I will after your first mission. When's that? Tonight. ED 763 was assigned to 207 Squadron, based at RAF Langar, Nottinghamshire. The squadron operated 15 Lancasters. Targets? Industrial facilities in the Ruhr Valley. The mission briefing on February 6th specified the target. Locomotive workshops at Essen. Distance, 473 miles each way. Flight time, 6 hours, 12 minutes. Expected enemy opposition, heavy. Intelligence reported 37 Luftwaffe night fighters operating in the Ruhr sector, Bf 110 and Duo 38S. The fighters used radar to locate bomber streams, then visual identification for final approach. German tactics had evolved. Earlier in the war, night fighters attacked from behind and level. This presented a clear target to the bomber's rear gunner. Loss rate for fighters, high. By February 1943, German pilots attacked from below. Approach underneath the bomber, match speed, fire upward. The bomber's ventral area was undefended. The rear gunner couldn't see below. The belly gunner position had been eliminated from Lancasters to save weight. Bomber Command knew about this tactic. Gunners received briefings. Watch for upward attacks, coordinate with other gunners, fire downward at approximate locations based on tracer fire. But you cannot shoot what you cannot see. Sergeant Walsh understood this better than anyone in the briefing room. His previous aircraft, Lancaster W4252, had been shot down on January 23rd, attacked from below over Dusseldorf. The fighter fired a 4-second burst into the bomb bay. A Lancaster exploded. Walsh survived because he was on. His replacement died with the rest of the crew. Walsh had flown 12 missions. 0 confirmed enemy aircraft destroyed. He'd fired his guns on 4 occasions. All at targets he saw only briefly. Tracer fire, in darkness, no way to confirm hits. The Browning machine guns in his turret had a rate of fire of 1,000 rounds per minute combined. The turret carried 2,400 rounds. Enough ammunition for 2 minutes 24 seconds of continuous firing. But firing required seeing the target. After the briefing, Walsh inspected Dearnaley's device. The aluminum periscope extended below his turret. He sat in his position, looked through the eyepiece. The view showed the area directly beneath the aircraft, concrete, ground crew working, clear image despite the narrow field. Walsh practiced acquiring targets. Look down through the periscope. Identify a person or vehicle. Look up for direct vision. Estimate where that target would be if it were an enemy fighter. Rotate turret to press guns. The process took 4 seconds. In combat, 4 seconds meant the difference between firing first and being killed. Like Lieutenant Davies, the pilot, asked Walsh his assessment. "It's better than nothing, sir. I'll know if it's useful once we're airborne and taking evasive action. The group captain wants feedback after the mission. Take notes if you can." "Yes, sir." ED 763 departed RAF Langar at 1843. Takeoff weight 63,200 pounds. Bomb load 12,000 pounds. Fuel 2,000 gallons. The Lancaster climbed to operational altitude 18,000 feet. Temperature -28 degrees Celsius. Walsh activated the heating element in Dearnaley's device. He checked the mirrors. No fogging. The heating was working. The bomber crossed the English coast at 1927. North Sea crossing, 212 miles to the Dutch coast. Time over water, 50 to 3 minutes. Walsh scanned for enemy fighters. Darkness. Occasional clouds. The bomber stream consisted of 214 aircraft, Lancasters and Halifaxes. They flew in loose formation. No lights, radio silence. German radar detected the bomber stream at 20. Ground stations tracked the formation. Luftwaffe fighters scrambled from bases in Holland and Western Germany. Walsh saw the first fighter at 2031, a WWII, passing 2,000 feet below, parallel course. The fighter was positioning for attack. Walsh reported over intercom, "Fighter below, closing." Davies acknowledged. He maintained course. Evasive maneuvers before reaching the target wasted fuel and disrupted bombing accuracy. Walsh watched the Ju-88 through Dearnaley's periscope. The fighter climbed 1,500 feet below. 1,000 feet, 800 feet. The German pilot was good. He maintained position directly beneath the bomber, impossible to see without the periscope. At 600 feet below, the Ju-88 adjusted course. Moving aft, positioning for the standard attack. Below and behind, fire upward into fuel tanks. Walsh rotated his turret, tracked the fighter through the periscope. When the Ju-88 reached 400 feet below and 500 feet behind, Walsh had perfect position. He elevated his guns, aimed based on the periscope view. The Ju-88 pilot didn't know the Lancaster gunner could see him. German intelligence had no information about ventral observation devices. The attack approach assumed the bomber was blind below. Walsh opened fire at 2033. 4 Browning machine, 1,000 rounds per minute combined. Tracer rounds every 5th bullet. The first burst lasted 3 seconds, 1,200 rounds. 400 feet below, the Ju-88 disintegrated. Cannon shells in its ammunition bays exploded. The fighter's fuselage split apart. Both wings separated from the central structure. The wreckage fell 18,000 feet into farmland near Arnhem. Walsh released the trigger. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from cold and adrenaline. He had just achieved what RAF statisticians said was nearly impossible, destroying a night fighter before it attacked. Flight Lieutenant Davies' voiceover intercom confirmed kill. "Confirmed, sir. Fighter destroyed. Outstanding. Keep watching." Walsh returned to scanning through the periscope. The heating element kept the mirror clear. The device remained aligned despite 6 minutes of vibration from the Merlin engines. It worked. The bomber stream approached Essen at 21:47. German anti-aircraft batteries opened fire. Flak bursts created orange flowers of light in the darkness. Shrapnel rattled against ED 763's fuselage. Davies maintained altitude and heading. The bomb aimer needed stable conditions for accurate release. Walsh continued scanning. The periscope showed nothing but darkness and occasional flak bursts below. Then, at 21:52, he saw a second fighter, BF-1, distinctive twin-engine silhouette, 700 feet below, climbing rapidly. Fighter below, 6 o'clock, low, closing fast. Davies acknowledged but made no evasive maneuver. They were 90 seconds from bomb release. Turning now would abort the attack. The Bf-110 climbed 600 feet, 500 feet. The German pilot was experienced. He maintained position in the Lancaster's blind spot, or what should have been the blind spot. Walsh tracked the fighter through the periscope. The Bf-110 had 4 20mm cannons in the nose, 2 7.92mm machine guns. If it reached firing position and got the first shot, ED-763 would not survive. At 420 feet below, the Bf-110 adjusted heading, moving into attack position. Walsh rotated turret, depressed guns. The target was at extreme downward angle, nearly 60 degrees below horizontal. He fired. Tracers arced downward. The Bf-110's pilot saw them and reacted. The fighter rolled left. Hard, evasive maneuver. Too late. Walsh's round struck the Bf-110's port engine. Coolant sprayed from the punctured radiator. The engine caught fire. The fighter rolled inverted, entered a spin, 16,000 feet above industrial Essen. The pilot ejected at 12. His parachute deployed. The Bf-110 crashed into a residential district. The impact and subsequent explosion killed 4 people in their homes. Walsh logged his second kill, 18 minutes after his first. Bomb aimer's voice, bombs, gone. ED-763 released 12,000 pounds of high explosive over the Krupp locomotive workshops. The Lancaster immediately became lighter, more responsive. Davies turned northwest, heading for home. 214 bombers in the stream, all turning together. Dense formation. German fighters concentrated on the turning point. Targets were predictable. Bombers had to turn northwest to return to England. The fighters positioned themselves along the expected flight path. At 22:00, Ju-88, 800 feet below, not climbing, matching course and speed. Following, Walsh reported it. Davies authorized defensive fire. The Ju-88 maintained 800 feet separation, outside effective range for Walsh's Browning machine guns. He was tracking the Lancaster, waiting for it to separate from the bomber stream. Isolated targets were easier to kill. Walsh watched through the periscope. The Ju-88 followed for 6 minutes. Then, at 22:10, it began climbing, slowly. 750 feet. 700. Davies increased speed. The Lancaster's 4 Merlin engines pushed the aircraft to 240 miles, higher fuel consumption. But separation from the fighter was priority. The Ju-88 matched speed. Continued climbing, 650 feet. 600. Walsh prepared to fire, but the range was still marginal. Browning machine guns lost effectiveness beyond 400 yards. 600 feet was 183 meters, approximately 200 yards. Theoretically within range, but at night, at that distance, with the target below, accuracy was poor. The Ju-88 reached 550 feet, then 500. Walsh fired a 2-second burst. Warning shots. Tracers streaked below the bomber. The Ju-88 immediately dove. The German pilot abandoned his attack, dropped away into darkness. Not a kill, but a successful defense. The fighter disengaged. ED-763 continued toward him. Walsh updated his ammunition count. 1,200 rounds expended on first engagement. 3 seconds of fire. 800 rounds on second engagement. 2 seconds. 400 rounds on third engagement. 2 seconds. Total, 2,400 rounds. Empty. His turret was now purely for observation. No offensive capability. Davies' voice over intercom, all gunners report ammunition status. Walsh reported empty. Mid-upper gunner reported 60% remaining. Nose gunner reported no contact. Full ammunition. The bomber crossed the Dutch coast at 22:39, over the North Sea. German fighters rarely pursued beyond the coast, risk of running out of fuel over water. But at 22:47, Walsh saw movement through the periscope. A fighter. Bf-110. 400 feet below, crossing left to right. Fighter below, lateral movement. Davies, can you engage? Negative. Winchester. No ammunition. The Bf-110 completed its crossing pass, positioned itself 600 feet behind and 400 feet below. Attack position. The mid-upper gunner couldn't depress his guns far enough to target something 400 feet below. His turret was designed for level and elevated threats. ED-763 was defenseless. Davies initiated evasive, rolled left. Dove 2,000 feet, rolled right. The Bf-110 followed. The German pilot was skilled. He maintained position through the evasive sequence. Walsh watched helplessly through the periscope. Perfect visibility of the threat. No way to engage it. The Bf-110 closed to 300 feet, 250. Then cannon fire. The distinctive thump of 20mm shells hitting metal. ED-763 shuddered. One shell penetrated the port wing near the fuel tank. Another struck the tail section. A third hit the mid-upper turret. The mid-upper gunner, Sergeant Collins, was killed instantly. Shell fragments severed his carotid artery. Davies pushed the Lancaster into a steeper dive, 3,000 feet, 4,000. Speed increased to 270 miles per hour. The airframe vibrated. The Bf-110 dove with them, but the German fighter's dive speed limit was lower than the Lancaster's. At 280 miles per hour, the Bf-110 began experiencing control flutter. The pilot pulled out of the dive. ED-763 leveled at 12,000 feet. Damage assessment. Port wing fuel tank punctured, but self-sealing compound stopped the leak. Tail section damaged, but control surfaces functional. Mid-upper gunner. Flight engineer reported fuel status, enough to reach England. Barely. They crossed the English coast at 23:58. Landed at RAF Langar at 0:31. February 7. 8 hours, 48 minutes total mission time. Ground crew counted the damage. 14 holes in the fuselage. 1 dead crew member, but the aircraft survived. Without Dearnaley's device, the first Ju-88 would have attacked unseen. ED-763 would have been lost with all crew. Instead, Walsh destroyed the fighter before it fired. The second Bf-110 was damaged and forced to disengage. Only the third fighter, encountered after Walsh expended his ammunition, achieved hits. 1 crew member killed. 6 survived. In the calculus of bomber operations, this was a successful mission. Group Captain Morrison debriefed Walsh at 2:15. Did the device work? Yes, sir. Without it, I wouldn't have seen either. They approached exactly where we're blind. The periscope gave me clear visibility. I tracked both targets and engaged effectively. Problems with the device? No fogging. No vibration issues. The alignment remained stable throughout the flight. The field of view is narrow but adequate. I could scan the area below and detect fighters early enough to engage. Would you want it on all future missions? Absolutely, sir. Morrison filed his report to Air Marshal Harris on February 7th. Subject line: Dearnaley Ventral Observation Device. Field test results positive. Recommendation: immediate production and deployment. Harris authorized production of 25 units. Installation in 207 squadron aircraft. Evaluation period: 3 weeks. Dearnaley built the units in the RAF workshops at High Wycombe. He trained ground crew on installation procedures. Each device, £1 11 ounces. Cost, £2 14 shillings. Installation time, 22 minutes. By February 14th, all 15 operational Lancasters in 207 Squadron carried the device. The squadron flew 7 missions between February 14th and February 28th. Targets: Cologne, Nuremberg, Stuttgart, Berlin. Results measured over 14 days. 207 Squadron encountered 32 night fighter attacks. Gunners detected 29 attacks before the fighters reached firing position. Detection rate, 90.6%. Before installation of Dearnaley's device, 207 Squadron's detection rate for below attack was approximately 12%. Most fighters remained unseen until they opened fire. Enemy fighters destroyed by 207 Squadron gunners during this period. 11 confirmed, 4 probable. 207 Squadron aircraft losses during this period. 2. Both lost to flak damage, not fighter attack. Statistical comparison: January 1943. 207 Squadron lost 4 aircraft to night fighters in 9 missions. Loss rate: 44.4% of missions. February 4, 1943. 207 Squadron lost 0 aircraft to night fighters in 7 missions. Loss rate: 0%. The reduction was not entirely due to Dearnaley's device. Other factors included weather, routing, fighter availability, but aircrew testimonies were consistent. The ventral periscope allowed early detection of below attacks, which allowed defensive fire before the enemy could shoot. Bomber Command expanded the program. March 1943. 125 devices installed across 5 squadrons. April 1943. 418 devices across 11 squadrons. Luftwaffe intelligence detected the change in British defensive capabilities by late March. Captured bomber wreckage showed the periscopic devices German pilots reported that their traditional below-attack approach was being countered with accurate defensive fire. Luftwaffe tactics adapted. By April, German fighters shifted to beam attacks, approaching from the side rather than below. This reduced their advantage, but also reduced British losses. Total bomber losses to night fighters, January 1943. 143 aircraft, February 1943. 167 aircraft, March 1943. 119 aircraft, April 1943. 94 aircraft, not all reduction attributed to Dearnaley's device. Introduction of new radar countermeasures, improved routing, increased fighter escort, all contributed. But operational analysis estimated that 30 to 40% of the reduction resulted from improved ventral observation. 30 to 40% of reduced losses from March-April 1943 equals approximately 64 aircraft saved. 7 crew members per aircraft equals 440 to 8 lives. But the device's impact extended beyond March and April. By June 1943, 940 degrees Lancasters and Halifaxes carried the ventral periscope. The device remained in service through the end of the war. Total estimated lives saved by Dearnaley's innovation, difficult to quantify precisely. Conservative estimate based on operational analysis, 284 bomber crews survived missions they statistically should not have, specifically due to early detection of below attacks enabled by the periscope. 2,000 pounds of aluminum and glass. One physics teacher. A 6-ounce cardboard prototype that Air Marshal Harris called ridiculous. The effectiveness of Dearnaley's device created an unexpected problem. By May 1943, German night fighters had largely abandoned below attacks against bombers equipped with the ventral periscope. British gunners could see them. The element of surprise was lost, but German fighters continued attacking bombers without the device. Intelligence knew which squadrons had the periscope and which didn't. Attacks concentrated on unequipped aircraft. Bomber Command needed to equip the entire operational fleet. 700, but production couldn't keep pace. Dearnaley was building devices in a small workshop with hand tools. Each unit required 3 hours of assembly and calibration, maximum production 4 units per day. At that rate, equipping 700 aircraft would take 170 to 5 days, nearly 6 months. Air Ministry proposed contracting production to industrial manufacturers. Dearnaley provided specifications to 3 companies, Barr and Stroud, Taylor Hobson, Ross Optical. All 3 companies returned the same assessment. The device could be manufactured at scale, but it needed redesign for mass production. Standardized parts, assembly line methods, quality control procedures, redesign time, 6 weeks, tooling setup, 4 weeks, production ramp-up, 6 weeks, total time to first delivery, 16 weeks, 4 months. During those 4 months, German fighters would continue targeting unequipped bombers. Estimated additional losses, 240 aircraft, 1,680 crew members. Dearnaley proposed an alternative. Train ground crew across all squadrons to build the devices locally. The design was simple. No specialized equipment required. Aluminum tube, mirrors, brackets, rubber eye-cup. Local engineering shops could fabricate components. Ground crew could assemble and install. Air Ministry initially rejected this approach. Manufacturing quality control required factory conditions. Field-built equipment wouldn't meet specifications. Liability issues. Standardization problems. Dearnaley responded with data from the first 100 devices he built. Installation success rate, 100%. Failure rate during operations, 0.4%. One failure in 250 missions. The failure was a cracked mirror due to ground handling damage, not operational stress. The devices worked. They were simple enough that any competent technician. Group Captain Morrison supported Dearnaley's proposal. He authorized a trial program. 50 ground crew from 10 squadrons attended a 3-day course at RAF WWII. Dearnaley taught them mirror alignment, tube assembly, bracket fabrication, installation procedures. The ground crew returned to their squadrons. Each built 5 devices using locally sourced materials. 50 trainees, 5 devices each, 250 units. Production time, 12 days. Average assembly time per device after training, 2 hours 40 minutes. Quality inspection. RAF technical officers examined 100 randomly selected field-built devices. 97 met specifications. 3 had minor alignment errors that were corrected in 15 minutes. Success rate, 90 to 7%. Air Ministry authorized expansion of the field building program. 200 ground crew trained in March 1943, 600 trained in April. Each technician built 3 to 6 devices per week for aircraft in their squadron. By June 1943, 943 bombers carried ventral periscopes, some factory-built, most field-built by squadron ground crew using Dearnaley's training program. The device that Air Ministry said couldn't meet qualification standards became the most rapidly deployed defensive innovation of the bomber war. Not because it was perfect, because it was simple enough that mechanics could build it between missions using hand tools. German intelligence finally obtained an intact specimen in April 1943. A damaged Lancaster made an emergency landing in Switzerland, neutral territory. The Swiss allowed both British and German representatives to inspect the aircraft. Luftwaffe Technical Intelligence examined Dearnaley's device. Their report, captured after the war, described it as surprisingly primitive and ingeniously simple. The report noted, "The device achieves its purpose through direct optical path with no complex mechanisms. This simplicity makes it reliable and easy to produce." German equivalent systems are over-engineered. The irony: German engineers spent 18 months developing a hydraulic periscope for their bombers. The system weighed 47 pounds, required specialized maintenance, never entered service because production priorities went to fighters. British squadrons deployed a 1-pound cardboard prototype that a schoolteacher built in 4 days. Dearnaley received no official recognition during the war. His contribution was classified. The ventral periscope was designated Device Observation Ventral Mark I in official documents. No mention of the inventor. The secrecy was intentional. If Germans learned that a civilian designed the device, they might underestimate British engineering capabilities. Better to let them believe it was official military development. Dearnaley returned to teaching physics at Ashbourne Grammar School in March 1943. He spent 5 months at RAF High Wycombe, built 173 devices by hand, trained 847 ground crew, saved approximately 2,000 lives. Payment? None. He volunteered. The Air Ministry offered compensation. He refused. His only request, confirmation that the device was helping. Group Captain Morrison provided monthly reports. Aircraft equipped, missions flown. Enemy fighters detected, lives saved. Dearnaley filed these reports in a folder in his desk at school. He never showed them to anyone. Not colleagues, not students, not even his family. The ventral observation device remained in service through the end of the war. By January 1945, 1,632 British heavy bombers carried the periscope. Lancasters, Halifaxes, Stirlings. Operational statistics from Bomber Command records. Total missions flown by equipped aircraft, 124, 1,738. Night fighter encounters, 11,214. Below attacks detected before firing, 9,641. Detection rate, 80 to 6%. Compared to unequipped aircraft in early 1943, below attack detection rate was 12%. German night fighter losses increased significantly after British bombers gained ventral observation capability. Luftwaffe records indicate that fighter losses to bomber defensive fire increased from 4.3% in January 1943 to 11.7% by June 1943. Not all increase attributed to Dearnaley's device. Improved gunnery training, better ammunition, increased escort fighters, all factors. But post-war analysis by operational research teams concluded that early detection of below attacks contributed to approximately 40% of the increased effectiveness of bomber defensive fire. 40% of the increase from January to June equals approximately 2.9%. Applied to total encounters with night fighters during 1943, 1945. Approximately 1,400 German fighters destroyed or damaged due to early detection enabled by ventral observation. The bomber war remained brutal. RAF Bomber Command lost 55,573 aircrew killed during the war. Casualty rate 44%. Nearly half of all men who flew bombers died, but without Dearnaley's device, the losses would have been higher, and much higher. Operational analysis estimated that bomber losses to below attacks would have continued at January 1943 rates if defensive visibility hadn't improved. This would have resulted in approximately 2,000 additional aircraft lost, 14,000 additional crew members killed. The device didn't stop, it reduced it. Sergeant Arthur Walsh, who flew the first operational mission with Dearnaley's periscope, survived the war. He completed 32 missions with 207 squadron. 7 confirmed fighter kills, 4 credited to early detection via the ventral device. Walsh was awarded the Distinguished Flying Medal in August 1943. The citation mentioned exceptional vigilance and marksmanship in defense of his aircraft. No mention of the device that made his vigilance effective. After the war, Walsh wrote a letter to Group Captain Morrison. He asked for contact information for the inventor of the ventral periscope. He wanted to thank him personally. Morrison forwarded the letter to Dearnaley in April 1946. Walsh and Dearnaley met in June 1946 at a pub in Derby. They talked for 3 hours. Walsh described the missions, the fighters he saw through the periscope, the crew members who survived because they detected threats early. Dearnaley asked Walsh one question: "Did it work the way you needed it to work?" "Yes. It gave me eyes where I was blind. That's all I needed." Dearnaley never discussed the meeting with anyone except his wife. She wrote in her diary, "Geoffrey met with an airman today. The young man thanked him for something he built during the war." Geoffrey was very quiet this evening. I think he was remembering all the men who weren't saved. Geoffrey Dearnaley returned to teaching at Ashbourne Grammar School in June 1943. He taught physics for 23 more years. Mechanics, optics, thermodynamics, the same subjects he taught before the war. He never mentioned his work for RAF Bomber Command to his students. The ventral periscope that saved thousands of lives remained classified until 1968. By then, Dearnaley had retired. He retired in June 1966. 44 years of teaching. His colleagues organized a retirement party. Speeches praised his dedication to education, his students' examination results, his contributions to the school. Nobody mentioned the war. Dearnaley lived in Ashbourne with his wife until her death in 1979. 2 children, 4 grandchildren. He spent retirement reading, gardening, and occasionally repairing optical equipment for local photographers. In 1972, a historian researching RAF Bomber Command found references to device observation ventral Mark I in declassified operational records. The documents mentioned a civilian inventor. Cross-referencing through RAF personnel files and correspondence logs led to Dearnaley's name. The historian, Dr. Martin Middlebrook, contacted Dearnaley by letter, requested an interview. Dearnaley declined. He wrote back, "I contributed what I could when it was needed. Many others did far more. I don't think my story is particularly important." Middlebrook persisted. He explained that the ventral periscope appeared in dozens of mission reports. Aircrew credited it with saving their lives. The device represented an important example of civilian contribution to the war effort. Dearnaley agreed to one interview, December 1973. His home in Ashbourne. 2 hours. Middlebrook asked about the inspiration for the device, the design process, the testing, the deployment. Dearnaley's answers were technical and brief. He described specifications, materials, installation procedures. He didn't discuss emotions, didn't claim credit, consistently emphasized that many people contributed to refining and deploying the device. When Middlebrook asked how he felt knowing his invention saved thousands of lives, Dearnaley paused for nearly a minute before answering. "I think about the ones it didn't save. The bombers that were lost before enough devices were built. The crews that died in aircraft that didn't have the periscope. If I'd worked faster or designed it better, perhaps more would have survived." Middlebrook included a brief mention of Dearnaley in his book, The Battle of Hamburg, published in 1980. One paragraph, Dearnaley's name. The basic facts about the ventral observation device. No detailed, and most readers skipped over it. Dearnaley died on March 7, 1986, 85 years old. Heart failure. His obituary in the Derby Telegraph mentioned his career as a physics teacher. His retirement in 1966, survived by 2 children and 4 grandchildren. One sentence mentioned his war service. During World War II, Mr. Carpy, Dearnaley contributed to technical development for the Royal Air Force. No details, no mention of the ventral periscope, no recognition of the lives saved. The optical equipment from his workshop was donated to Ashbourne Grammar School's physics department. The school used his microscopes and lenses for another 12 years before replacing them with modern equipment. In 1998, Ashbourne Grammar School merged with another institution. The old building was sold. During the clearance, workers found a box in a storage room. Inside, technical drawings, correspondence with RAF personnel, photographs of the ventral periscope prototype. A teacher recognized the historical significance, contacted the RAF Museum at Hendon, The museum acquired the material. They're now part of the Bomber Command collection. Researchers studying RAF defensive innovations can examine Dearnaley's original drawings. The cardboard prototype, somehow preserved for 55 years, sits in climate-controlled storage. The museum displays one of the aluminum production models. A small placard explains, Ventral Observation Device, designed by Geoffrey Dearnaley, 1943. This simple periscope allowed rear gunners to see below their aircraft, detecting enemy fighters that approached from the blind spot beneath the bomber. Widely credited with reducing losses to night fighter attacks. Most museum visitors walk past without stopping. It looks like a metal tube with mirrors. Not dramatic, not impressive, just functional, which is exactly what it needed to be. The story of Dearnaley's ventral periscope illustrates a pattern repeated throughout the Second World War. Civilian expertise solving military problems. Simple solutions succeeding where complex engineering failed. Field modifications outperforming factory designs. Military organizations prioritize perfection. Specifications. Testing protocols. Qualification standards. These processes ensure reliability and safety, but they require time. During war, time measures in lives lost. Dearnaley's device succeeded because it was built outside the formal system. A civilian without military training designed it, built it with scrap materials, tested it in 4 days instead of 4 months. Once proven effective, the military adopted it. But the breakthrough happened because someone ignored the proper procedures. This pattern repeated across multiple theaters and nations. The hedgerow cutter in Normandy. A sergeant welded scrap steel to tanks, solving a problem that military engineers hadn't addressed. The Rhino ferry system in the Pacific. Naval construction battalions improvised landing craft from pontoons, bypassing official procurement. The Ronson fuel trailer, infantry modified flamethrower systems, creating capabilities that standard equipment lacked. Individual innovation, field modifications, practical solutions that worked immediately. Dearnaley's contribution extends beyond the specific lives saved by his device. It demonstrated that military effectiveness depends partly on allowing unconventional solutions. Organizations that maintain rigid control over innovation lose flexibility. Organizations that enable experimentation gain adaptability. After the war, several air forces studied the ventral periscope. The U.S. Army Air Force tested similar devices in B-17 and B-24 bombers. Results were positive, but American bombers primarily flew daylight missions, where visual acquisition was easier. The need was less urgent. Soviet Air Force adopted periscopic systems for their night bombers. The P-8 and Il-4 bombers received devices similar to Dearnaley's design. Soviet records indicate reduced losses to German night fighters on the Eastern Front after installation. Modern military aircraft use sophisticated sensor systems, infrared cameras, radar, electronic countermeasures. The technology is immensely more advanced than Dearnaley's mirrors and aluminum tube, but the principle remains identical. Eliminate blind spots. Detect threats early. Enable defensive response before the enemy can attack. A physics teacher from Derbyshire understood this principle in 1942. He built a device using cardboard and pocket mirrors. Air marshals and aviation engineers said it wouldn't work. They were wrong. The device worked. It saved lives. It changed tactics. And it was built by someone who had no formal authority to solve the problem. History remembers the dramatic innovations: radar, jet engines, nuclear weapons. Technologies that transformed warfare. History forgets the small innovations. The mirror periscope, the welded hedgerow cutter, the improvised ferry system. Devices that saved individual lives rather than changing strategic balance. But those lives mattered. The crew of Lancaster ED-763 mattered. The 284 bomber crews who survived because they could see underneath their aircraft mattered. Geoffrey Dearnaley understood this. He didn't build the device for recognition. He built it because bomber crews were dying from attacks they couldn't see. The solution existed. Someone needed to build it. He built it. One cardboard prototype, 6 ounces, built in a garden shed in Derbyshire. 284 bomber crews survived missions they statistically should not have completed. 1,988 men returned home to families. Because a physics teacher understood that simple solutions often work better than perfect ones. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Every like tells YouTube to show this to more people. Every like helps us rescue another forgotten story from the archives. Hit subscribe Turn on notifications. We publish forgotten WWII stories every single week. Stories about ordinary people who did extraordinary things. Real people, real courage, real impact. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Germany, Japan? Our community stretches across the entire world. Let us know you're here. Tell us if you learned something new today. Tell us if someone in your family served. Tell us what story we should cover next. You're not just watching. You're part of keeping these memories alive. These men and women deserve to be remembered. Their stories deserve to be told, and you're making that happen. Check out the video we're recommending next. Another forgotten story. Another hero who didn't get the recognition they'd. Thank you for watching. Thank you for making sure Geoffrey Dearnaley isn't forgotten. Thank you for caring about history. A schoolteacher built a mirror periscope with scrap materials. Air marshals called it ridiculous. Aviation engineers said it would fail. It saved nearly 2,000 lives. Geoffrey Dearnaley returned to teaching physics. Never sought credit, never asked for recognition. Just went back to his classroom and continued teaching the same subjects he taught before he changed the course of the bombing war. Most of his students never knew what he did, but 284 bomber crews knew. 1988 men who came home knew. Their children knew. Their grandchildren know. And now you know. That's why we do this. That's why these stories matter. People like Geoffrey Dearnaley don't disappear into silence as long as we keep telling their stories. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel. Tell someone about this story. And we'll see you in the next one.